I'd like to thank everybody for watching today and welcome you to the introduction to the link. The purpose of this video is to raise awareness of the link between animal abuse and domestic violence, explain why this link is so important to understand, and empower you to recognize, report, and stop abuse. I have a few statistics before I introduce everybody that I feel will explain it a little bit better to people that are wanting more information on the link. And we're also going to list some phone numbers and websites for more information after this video. A survey of pet-owning families with substantiated physical child abuse found that animals were also abused in 88% of those homes. Of women seeking shelter at a safe house, 71% reported that their male partners threatened, harmed, or killed their pets. And 32% of mothers said that their children had done the same. And this is a panel that we have asked to be on today of professionals, and hopefully they're going to give you some really great information and tips. I'd like to get started. First of all, my name is Lona Angies, and I'm the Humane Educator at the Animal Welfare Society. And with us today is Claire Fortune-Agan, who is a community educator at Caring Unlimited. We have Katie Lisnick, who her title is quite a mouthful. She is the Maine State Director of the Humane Society of the United States. And this is Gretchen Pianka, who is a pediatrician. And I guess I'm going to begin with you, Claire. And why don't you explain what exactly is domestic violence?
Yeah, thanks for having us,
Sure.
Lona. And I'm from Caring Unlimited, like Lona said. We're the domestic violence program for York County, but there are services like ours in other counties around the country. So domestic violence is, I think, often a pretty misunderstood phenomenon. It really is the use of power and control by one person over another in an intimate partner relationship or a familial relationship. So abusers use tactics like intimidation, isolation, threats, financial exploitation, lots and lots of things, often but not always including physical and sexual violence to control their partners or their children. And 85% of domestic violence, reported and unreported, is male perpetrator, female victim. That doesn't mean it's not something that happens just as much, actually, in gay and lesbian partnerships. And about 5% of the time, women do use that power and control over men. But you'll notice I might use she and he pronouns in a weighted way because of those statistics. So that's kind of domestic violence in a nutshell, Lona.
So why, I mean, a victim of domestic violence, obviously they know they're in a situation that may be dangerous for themselves, their pets, their children. Why don't they just leave the situation?
It's a question I get almost every day. And, you know, people who care about their friends, their sisters, their mothers want to see them leave an abuser who's using power and control over them. But the reality of the situation is that when someone is trying to leave or after they have left is the highest risk. I'm going to start that sentence over. So the time when murders and assaults are the most likely to happen are when a victim is trying to leave or after she has left. So those threats that the abuser has made towards her children, towards her animals, are what keep her from believing that she can safely get out of there. And so that's why there needs to be a really thorough plan before someone tries to get away from an abuser.
So I'm going to go off script a little bit because that I think it's really important for people watching this video to know how much they can help and how important it is to help. And we're going to give a lot of tips and ideas. A lot of people don't want to get involved. There are mandated reporters, though. So who is mandated to report when they clearly recognize abuse or violence?
Yep, so domestic violence isn't necessarily a reportable event. It depends on a couple of different things. About 50% of abusers who hurt their intimate partners also hurt their children. So when children are being abused, you have any suspicion of abuse or neglect of children, that is a reportable event. And Gretchen's going to talk a lot more about that. But those people who are mandated to report that are, you know, any medical healthcare professionals, teachers, you know, child care providers, social workers, bus drivers, law enforcement, clergy. There's a complete list on mainelegislature.org if you want to check that out. Also, the abuse of an incapacitated or dependent adult is a mandated reportable event. So that is a mouthful, incapacitated or dependent. It's often an elderly person, but not always. And not all elderly people being abused needs to be reported. So dependent means that it could be someone living in a nursing home or an assisted living facility, or someone who can't adequately provide for their daily needs. And then incapacitated is someone who can't make those choices about their estate or other important decisions on their own. So really, you don't have to know if someone's incapacitated or dependent. If you have a suspicion that someone is disabled or otherwise incapacitated and they're being abused, that needs to be reported to Adult Protective Services. And I am kind of going all over the place,
no, that's perfect. We'll get it all together.
Hard to explain. Yeah.
We've also titled this video, The Introduction to the Link. We haven't quite thoroughly explained what the link is. So I'm going to leave that to Katie. If you would just take a moment and explain what the link is and why it's so important for professionals to look for all forms of abuse, including animal abuse.
Thank you, Lona, and we appreciate being here today. The link between animal abuse and human violence is something that's been well documented as far back as the 1970s. Numerous studies, a couple of which you mentioned in our introduction, have shown that animal abuse occurs when there is domestic violence in the home, child abuse, elder abuse, any type of human violence. You often have animal abuse occurring at the same time or prior. Different studies have shown that in domestic violence situations, over 80% of reporting women will have had pets abused or harmed. Children often are going to be abusing animals in homes where they see it modeled. So really, what we're asking is the fact that animal abuse is not seen as something separate from human violence, that it's something that is incredibly well linked into human violence. So when you have animals being abused in the home, take a look at what's happening to the people, or when you have people being abused in the home, make sure you're taking a look at how the animals are being treated. And that, in a nutshell, is what the link is all about.
Okay, we're going to go to Gretchen. I have obviously more specific questions as you're the pediatrician on our panel. How might physicians and other professionals bring up the subject of abuse or neglect if they suspect a client might be exposed to an unhealthy situation?
Yeah, and this, I think all of us who work with families know that this can be a bit of a tricky, sticky topic to bring up. It's kind of hard for families to admit, like Claire was saying, hard for them to admit how things are going in their house. Sometimes they're not ready to make a change, especially if they're allowing something to happen to their children or their pets. They might be particularly anxious about talking about it. Usually the approach that I find works in my practice and that I've found works with families is to approach it sort of from a risk-based strategy. Most of the child abuse risk factors are things that have to do with an imbalance in the parental expectations and then what you can kind of normally expect from a child of that developmental stage. So if you come at it from that standpoint, I tend to avoid the blame. And so I'm not saying, oh, you bad person, you've been hurting your kid or you're being mean to your animals. I'm saying, oh, wow, listening to a baby cry for 3 hours, that could be hard. How do you handle that? And then sometimes they'll elaborate. Sometimes, most of the time when they say something, it's not the obvious kinds of abuse. Will I shove them down the stairs or I, smother them with a pillow? You don't get that kind of reporting. But you'll get something like, well, I've started, leaving them alone for 4 hours or whatever until I can go out there. So they tend to be red flags that you pick up on. And then you have the opportunity to kind of intervene and offer them some more functional approaches. One of the common things that I see are the behavior problem kids, the busybody ADHD 3- and 4-year-olds who are charging around the room and mom's yelling at them and nobody's responding. So that's a red flag. It's like, so how do you handle, I'll say something like, wow, this guy's really busy. How do you handle this at home? I think this might drive me crazy. So trying to empathize and then acknowledge and then counsel and teach, and give them something to do. Sometimes in the course of that, you obviously will get responses that make you say, oh my God, I really do have to report this to DHS. But like, you guys have already pointed out, a lot of this stuff, if you're a mandated reporter like pediatricians are, you have to say certain things if you're really certain abuse is happening. But a lot of it is kind of what we would call subclinical. I mean, you're concerned, but nothing is really coming up that you can or should call DHS about. So that's more of, look at it as
And a lot of situations, maybe you would be able to offer support instead of having to report.
Exactly, and it's so much nicer for families to say, hey, let me empower you, let me help you figure out how to do this better, and then I, as a mom too, I say, wow, that's exhausting, listening to your baby scream is exhausting, let's make sure they don't have reflux, let's do this, let's try changing their formula, and by the way, maybe when they're crying, you could call your friend or your mom and have somebody come and help you, because that can wear you out.
And in the situation, like Claire works with domestic violence often, and people are hesitant to give away any signs. And one of the things that, as professionals, you guys find that works is bringing up a pet. And I wanted to ask you, how might the subject of a pet break the ice and open up a dialogue between a client and a professional?
Yeah, well, that's something, I love that question, because I think as a pediatrician, I'll often use, do you have pets at home, to break the ice with a patient, just regardless of the whole abuse and neglect thing, just to make friends with a nervous little girl who doesn't want to get shots or something. Do you have any pets at home? And so then they'll start telling me about their pets. And since little kids often don't know it, that they maybe shouldn't tell that story that was so sad about what happened to Fluffy, they'll start telling me the story. And when they do disclose anything, I'll try to, again, do the same kind of approach that I have with the parents. I'll try to acknowledge, wow, that sounds really scary. I bet you felt bad that you couldn't keep Fluffy safe, or, whatever. And give them some time to keep talking. And sometimes they don't. They just sit there and nod. And so then I say, well, do you feel safe? And sometimes it's hard, because when you've got a little kid, you've always got parents in the room. So there's always an audience to what we're talking about. But it does seem to, sometimes kids do seem to be able to talk about something or say that sometimes they're scared or elaborate. So it helps to get them going and give them permission to talk.
I work with children in my job, and I find that they're so open to talking about their pets. When they don't want to talk about themselves, they're not comfortable, but they always want to talk about their animals.
Mm-hmm. Can I just jump in? Also, if you're going into homes, animals can be a great way to kind of figure out the dynamics of the home as well. Even if the people don't want to say something, or they're not providing you any information to questions that you're asking, watch how the animals interact with each of the family members. Mm-hmm. If they're acting particularly protective towards a certain member, if they act scared of a certain member based on what that certain family member is doing, you can get very nonverbal cues from how the animals react to indicate how the humans behave in the household.
That's interesting and really good advice. I think a lot of people go into the home, and we might mention this later on, get to the second page yet, but a lot of people don't know exactly when they should make that call, or if they should, or maybe that's not a big deal. And I think you had mentioned it's always a better idea to make that call. It's not going to hurt anybody with any kind of concern to make a call. You might end up doing a great good, and if they find that it's not that serious, then that's good.
And it can be very scary, because when someone does disclose to a provider that abuse is happening, or even that you as the provider feel you need to make the call, there can be retaliation when the state knocks on that door. The abuser has no doubt made threats to the victims that if you tell, this is going to happen. So it's not always possible, but if there's a non-offending parent, if you can talk to that parent and say, I do need to call this in. It's not always possible. Often both parents are right there, and then that's not safe. But there can be some scary reactions after the report's made, which doesn't mean you're not mandated reporters. You still are, and it still can be the best thing that happened when another agency got involved to help, because getting out away from an abuser is very, very difficult to do safely. So that's why we all need to kind of notice and help out.
And it's a good time to mention for non-mandated reporters that it is anonymous. You can make an anonymous call. If you request that it be anonymous, is that?
Yeah, you can request confidentiality. So you still have to tell the intake worker on the phone what your name is and where you're from, but you can request that they don't tell the family who called it in. They might still figure it out, but it could save a life.
Do you often see households with human, child, or elder abuse combined with animal abuse?
Absolutely. Hurting animals in front of people is a very, very effective way to scare, threaten, control people. You know, you see something happen to a cat, you know, getting abused, and you think, that could be me next. That horrible thing could happen to me. You know, even if you're a child or an adult, it's just a very, very creepy and effective way to control someone. And also, I think one of the really important things to know about the link is that when people know that they can't bring their dog or their cat or their guinea pig or their horse to a shelter, that keeps them from wanting to leave that dog or that pig or that whatever with the abuser, because they know he said, I'm going to kill your dog if you leave me. Mm-hmm. So I want to highlight that we have a partnership with the Animal Welfare Society in West Kennebunk, where they will foster an animal while a woman is going to shelter and getting safe and getting a new housing situation for 30 days. And then she can get her animal back, which is something a lot of people don't know. And it's good news because
right. That's something to share with if you have a friend or a relative that's considering, you know, getting out of a situation like that. That often helps to give them that information. And our website, the Animal Welfare website, will be on at the end of the show, or you could call and speak with someone. And there's information. It's called the PAWS program, and that's a great partnership that we have with Caring Unlimited. So,
and can I just jump in as well? A lot of other domestic violence shelters have partnerships like that with other shelters around the state. So even if you're dealing with someone or have a friend or a family member who's outside of York County, call and ask, because more often than not there will be something available to help. And also for large animals as well. It's a little bit more difficult to find a foster home or a place to put them, but we have had success with it. And it's worth an ask. If it can help get somebody out of an abusive situation and get those animals out of the abusive situation, people will try to find a place for them.
right.
And you also can put your pets in your protection from abuse orders as well, so that the judge signs off and the law enforcement knows that those animals are supposed to come with you when you're leaving the situation.
Excellent. That's fairly new, right?
Yes. Maine was the first state in the nation to pass that.
Excellent. So what would be the first step, like a social worker or anyone that suspects abuse? What would you recommend? Do you recommend that they maybe say something to a victim in the household, or maybe just separate themselves from the situation and then make the call and talk to somebody first?
So it all depends. That's probably the answer we all give to a lot of questions. And I know you're probably sitting here watching this video thinking, this isn't my job. I don't have time in my busy medical practice or my busy day delivering postal packages to deal with this. It's way beyond my means. And I'm here to say it can be a 2-minute conversation that can save a life. So really, when you're concerned about someone, when you see a bruise or a black eye, and you don't feel that the abuser is right there, you can say, you know, I'm concerned about you. I've noticed these concrete things. Or you can say, you know, has anyone ever hurt or threatened you in your home? We advocate for doctors and dentists and social workers to try to ask that of every patient, because you never know who's going to say, you know, actually, yes, and I really need to talk about this. So remembering when you do ask that, and in the rare occasion that someone's going to say yes, to stay away from telling them what to do, because someone who's being abused is being told what to do every second of their day. And one more person being like, you should leave, is just going to feel like another abuser. So understanding that leaving is a process that needs to be safely planned out to minimize risk, and understanding that she knows her abuser best, she knows her children best, she knows herself best. She's going to be able to make the safest plan. And we can help with that. And you can tell her about our services at Caring Unlimited, give her a chance to sit in an empty office and call, or just, give her a card with our hotline number on it, which we'll have up at the end of the show, thanks to our friends here at Biddeford Public Access. So just saying, I'm concerned for your safety, validating the feelings she's sharing with you. You sound really scared. And making sure you contradict those excuses that she makes for her abuser. The abuser is no doubt blaming her for what's happening, blaming the kids for what's happening, and not taking responsibility that abuse is a choice. So I guess I'll take this opportunity to just tell you about the services we provide really quick, so you can tell someone in this 2-minute window that you might have with them, they can call us. A lot of people think we're just a shelter. We are a shelter, but we have a lot of other services too. And most people who call us don't ever come to the shelter. So that can be comforting to people to know that you're not going to have to do anything. And so there is the PAWS program, Pets and Women to Safety, where the animals can get fostered while someone comes to shelter or is, living with a friend because they're escaping abuse. So our shelter's in a confidential location, 18 beds. It's a big old Victorian house. We work really hard to make it, like a home. We also have support groups in Biddeford, Limerick, Sanford, and Kittery. And those have free childcare, so that's something that really helps people come out. And safety planning one-on-one with advocates in all those towns. We have legal services, which are free and confidential, so you can get help with a protection from abuse order that, includes your kids, includes your pets, if that's what you need. And divorce and child custody when there's abuse involved, we also help with. And I also do trainings for service providers like yourselves about, more in depth, even though I'm talking a lot already. But I have more to say because it's not always the most simple issue.
And now you, Katie. On the other note, the other side of the link, what can someone do that suspects animal abuse or neglect?
Well, this is always, like you said, it depends. Typically, the best call to first make is to your town's animal control officer. I can't sit here and give every single town animal control officer's phone number, so you're going to have to do a little bit of digging on your own. Typically, they're operating out of your town's town hall or police department if you have a local police department.
And we have a list at the Animal Welfare Society. If you call the shelter, we have a list of all the animal control officers in York County. So
excellent. What I recommend is that even if you're not seeing animal abuse or think you might suspect it, just get to know your animal control officer, because they're the ones that are out in the town. They're enforcing the dangerous dog laws, which are always good to know, just in case you run into a dog that wants to bite you. They're also enforcing the dogs at large, so if you find a dog running loose, you're going to know who to call. If you have nuisance animal complaints, wildlife complaints, anything that you run into, which you might just be driving down the street and, oh, there's a dog running loose without any tags, what do I do? It's good to know your animal control officer above and beyond abuse issues. But getting to know your ACO, you'll also get to know whether they're comfortable dealing with animal abuse cases or not. Maine has a wide range of animal control. Their training is pretty basic, and then they can go above and beyond as they're able to and as they're able to afford training. So some are very comfortable doing cruelty investigations on their own, and their town encourages them to do so. Others are a little bit limited financially, and so they are not able to take on that. But getting to know your ACO will let you know that, so right off the bat. And if you know your town won't take on a cruelty case, then the other place to call is the state's Animal Welfare Program, which is a program run by the Department of Agriculture. Their number is going to be up on the screen, but it's 1-877-279-9200, and that's a hotline you can call. You'll speak with them. You can be anonymous for animal cruelty complaints, and they are a team of statewide humane agents who will go out and investigate animal cruelty.
And why is it important for a person to get involved with, a complaint or a, concern about animal abuse if they don't have any involvement with animals at all, such as, say, Gretchen?
Yep.
And maybe she notices something or someone mentions something about just an animal.
Sure. And I would say there's really two major reasons that pop to mind. The first one is that no animal deserves to be abused. In and of itself, animals can suffer, animals can feel pain, can be scared. And so if we are living in a humane society where we are compassionate, we have empathy for all living things, no animal should be subject to that. So right off the bat, if you care about
Most
animals,
obvious.
you should be reporting them. For people that maybe don't feel that animals do need the proper care or just think someone else will do it, there's also the issue of the fact that pets are part of people's families. We all know people who the pets are their kids, they just love animals, and they're an integral part of the family life. So if you're neglecting one family member, you're neglecting the entire family. So if you're not taking into account the fact that the animal is an integral part of that family and reporting on it, you're missing an entire piece of it. It's just like if you weren't reporting on the kids. They're part of the family.
Right, and there's a huge possibility if an animal's being neglected that something's off in the family dynamics.
Very much so.
So just listening to you talk about the abused animals, and if people aren't caring for animals appropriately, children are often very empathetic, and they're the same size as the animal. They're very attached to these animals, and watching them get hurt, like you were saying, having somebody threaten to hurt or actually hurt an animal in front of a kid can be devastating. So having that. Having behavior problems secondary to kind of, whether you actually diagnose PTSD or somebody diagnoses a mental health condition, but oftentimes it can be related to watching animals get hurt or being in an unsafe environment where they're constantly nervous, constantly anxious. Bonding issues between the parents and the children, between the children and the pets, that whole, the whole family dynamic. Kids who are incredibly afraid of a certain grown-up or not showing appropriate affection. That I always think of the kids who come into my office and run up and give me a hug, and I've never seen them before. And they're right at that age where they're supposed to be completely afraid of strangers. I'm like, something's going on here. So those kinds of inappropriate affection, either too much or too little. And then there are a bunch of medical things which most physicians probably would think of. Some that come to mind are just constipation, urinary accidents, bedwetting at an inappropriate age, or daytime accidents can sometimes be a sign of either as physical or sexual abuse. And then, withdrawing, so a kid who was really social and happy all of a sudden just clams up and doesn't want to talk at all. And then the behavior problem kids are at a higher risk, and any kid with underlying medical problems is at a higher risk for getting maltreated at home. So just being aware of that, premature babies, colicky babies, developmentally delayed children, sort of like the incapacitated elder type, people who can't take care of themselves or voice whether somebody's hurting them, are at a higher risk too.
It's interesting. I learned something, and I'm just going to mention it again because I just found it so interesting. So like a worker that would go into the house, a child that runs right over and throws themselves in this worker's arms, that could actually be a flag. I would just, oh my God, this kid's so friendly. But that might be something to just maybe, and if you feel it in your gut, right, that's the most, the biggest sign if something just isn't quite right with that. Right. Give them a call. I found that really interesting. And Katie, just back to you for a second, because I didn't mention when we talked about the animals and the animal abuse, are there mandated animal abuse reporters?
There are. The state humane agents are mandated reporters. Obviously, they're going to be reporting animal cruelty because that's what they do, but they're also mandated reporters on elder abuse, child abuse, and domestic violence. A lot of the animal cruelty reporting is permissive, which is one step below mandated, and most social service workers, pediatricians, teachers are permissive reporters of animal cruelty, which means that you don't have to, but you are strongly encouraged to, and if you do, you have protection. So if you make that report, turns out that it was false, you have some liability protection that the state law affords you.
Excellent. I think what it boils down to is it's the right thing to do.
Right.
And if you have any questions or anything in your gut telling you something's, you're best to make the call, request that it be anonymous, and the worst case you're wrong, and that's great. But it could save a life, as you mentioned. And I need to mention that any of these organizations, professionals watching this video can request a training on the link. We have professionals that will actually come to your workplace and give you much more information. We're going to list all the numbers if you suspect child abuse or sexual assault or elder abuse or animal abuse. There's a list of numbers. There's also going to be a list of websites at the end of this video. The Linkage Project, I mean, we've just the tip of the iceberg here today, and we wanted to make this short, and I'm sure we went a little longer than we thought because there's so much information. And you know, we may do this again with more detailed information, but we just wanted to get the word out there and touch base, because I'm blown away by the amount of people that don't even realize that there's a link, and they don't know what to do, and you know, why should they report it, and they think it's going to be this huge process, or they think children are going to be ripped from their families when that isn't necessarily so. And so I think it's great that we got the opportunity to get the information out there, and I'm hoping that, you know, we can do more. We talked about our next video being actually directed towards maybe the victims of abuse and neglect, and, you know, the people that have the animals and that kind of thing. So hopefully we'll get to do this again. But again, pay attention to the numbers, and please call or get on the website for more information. Thank you guys so much. I didn't know how we were going to pull this off, but I think this came out well, and I hope that, you know, people got some important information. So thank you guys for watching, and hopefully we'll get to do this again.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.